Rotarians have been meeting at the Adelaide Oval for as long as we care to remember. And as the club has grown and changed over the years, so has the Oval. Today, we are privileged to have one of Adelaide's own, Adam Hannon, lead architect of the Oval Redevelopment and director of COX Architecture here in Adelaide, tell us the backstory of making arguably the most loved and prettiest cricket oval in the world even better and more stunning. It's a testament to Adam's consummate skill and understanding of the design task that the final result has not only met but exceeded our expectations and put our fear and trepidation of losing our original iconic Adelaide Oval to rest. COX Architecture have been responsible for a suite of awards and projects including the National Wine Centre, the Adelaide Studios of the South Australian Film Corporation, the Karen Rolton Oval, the Adelaide Botanic High School, and they're in the midst of completing Her Majesty's Theatre redevelopment. Internationally, COX are known for such iconic buildings such as the Optus and Amy Stadiums, the National Maritime Museum of China, and the Sir John Monash Centre. I understand that while the bulk of the presentation that Adam will present will be on the Adelaide Oval, he will give an insight into the design of some other interesting South Australian projects, and perhaps even, time permitting, even of the new hotel where the cathedral room used to be. Please give a warm welcome to Adam Hannon.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to you today. Delighted to have the chance to take you on a bit of a, I guess, behind-the-scenes tour of the design process, construction and outcome for the Oval, and hopefully, time permitting, a few other projects as well has been mentioned. Just firstly, about ourselves. So just in terms of our practice, we are, I guess, a global practice, a national practice with an office here in Adelaide. There's six Australian studios. We've got over 500 staff. It is a large group, but we're very lucky in Adelaide to have kind of a boutique office that gets to work on some of the best projects in Adelaide. I have been working overseas and nationally for a long time, so the opportunity to come back to Adelaide, my hometown, and work on the Oval was an incredible delight and a real privilege, and I'm happy to have the chance to take you through a few of those experiences. As has been mentioned, we do projects around the nation, around the world. We work on sports projects, cultural projects, infrastructure, really sort of major work in a lot of major cities, and it's a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to tap into that and bring a lot of that thinking back to South Australia, and I guess make it relative and relevant for our local environment. In Adelaide, as has mentioned, sort of a 20-year practice history off the back of a 60-year history in other parts of the world. Started with the Wine Centre, which was our first project here with Grieve Gillette at the time, and a lot of work over those years in sport, in education, in transport, and more recently on the theatre, and hopefully I get a chance to talk to you about Her Majesty's Theatre because it's a really exciting project. On a personal note, as I mentioned, the chance to work on these public projects in Adelaide, going through my career, I couldn't have hoped for a better way to find myself and my family time back in my hometown. It's really incredibly satisfying. So the Adelaide Oval is effectively the project that we founded our practice on, as in a local practice when we completed the final redevelopment in 2014, but our journey started a lot earlier than that, actually in Melbourne, and I'm going to walk you through some of the very early days, early thoughts, starting with the Western Stand project, moving through to the main redevelopment. I'm going to show you some material that hasn't always been publicly known and visible, some of our early design ideas and some of our investigations and some of the parts of the journey along the way. Look, I think it's fair to say, and this club would be very aware of the incredible history of this ground, and this is quite a famous shot. I think it's a 1902 Test match shot from England and Australia, and actually still to this day kind of summarises a lot of what Adelaide oval means, that classic, pavilion, the sort of promenade that runs around the oval. It's always been one of the most beautiful and picturesque places to celebrate sort of sport, but also social and cultural gatherings around the world. And the challenge for us to actually come and try and change that and develop, came with a lot of responsibility. We never wanted to lose the sense of the incredible history of this ground. We always kind of go back to these images along the journey and remind ourselves what a privilege it is to do any work at this oval. And I think everything we did really developed on that incredible history. That was such an important part of it to us. So look, our journey started back in the early 2000s, and this is a shot after the redevelopment of what was at the time the chapel stands. You had the members stand across the end of the image. Of course, the northern mound, the hill and the scoreboard, which is still there today, was a big part of it, and the ground had an incredible character, but it was also at a time where cricket and soccer really decided that they wanted to take the ground to the next level, and they wanted to create a contemporary cricket pavilion and a re-established members pavilion to significantly enhance the experience. It was interesting that even at this time, the first project that we worked on, which was the Western Stand, was a bit controversial in a sense that any change here was going to be discussed at length, and rightly it should have been. So we came up with this design, and we worked with a group called Hassel at the time for a new members pavilion. And that word pavilion is really very important. It was never going to be a modernised stadium. It was never going to be anything but a cricket pavilion in the traditional sense of the word. So this image, one of our original 3D renders, shows, of course, the ground with the northern mound, the hill, the scoreboard, the trees, chapel stands on the eastern side, and the Bradman stand at the south. But then this new insertion that would retain all the heritage arches at the back, actually retain that central Giffen stand committee room, and then delicately, drop this new contemporary pavilion on top of it. It was in some ways a much less ambitious project than obviously the ultimate redevelopment was, but it also very much set the scene and the style and the character for all the work that was to come from that point. The construction was probably one of the first times the ground really started to feel like a very contemporary outcome. The original design of the Western Stand with its diagrid roof shells, again a very structurally different thing that had been done in Australia before, but still keeping that pavilionisation or that sense of it being a traditional pavilion within the setting of the ground. When it was complete for an Ashes tour in 2008, apart from the result of that test match, I don't know if anyone went to that opening test match, but Australia opened the batting and it was very much carnage from that point. But it really was a celebration of the great test match of Adelaide, and any test match here is an amazing time. And I think everyone at that point probably felt that there was something, hopefully quite magical about this new thing that cricket had invented, something for the members, but something for the rest of the ground. And the spirit of that project really set the scene for the rest of the outcome. It's interesting looking back at this aerial image in 2008 to see how much the city's changed, and I think one of the observations I would make is that the Adelaide Oval project or series of projects really has been a catalyst for change in the city, and the rejuvenation of the Riverbank precinct and everything that really came out of this original project back in 2008 I think has been a really interesting and amazing part of my experience coming back to South Australia as well. So the pavilion roofs, those curvature roof forms, the sense of retaining the northern mound, and obviously eventually what would become a new connection to the city, but in this incredible parkland environment, was so important at the time. So interestingly, at the same time, we were actually working with SACA and the AFL on some very early ideas for a redeveloped oval. It was pretty controversial at the time, it must be said. This is not an image that was ever put to media or print. Other versions have been, but even at that early time, you really got a sense of what was possible. So a new proposal to put a new southern stand and a new eastern stand, very much in the character of both the new western stand but also the chapel stands. You might see the detail of the fabric roofs on the eastern side. We also came up with this idea of a bridge connection to really connect the venue back to the Festival Theatre, a different alignment that finally eventuated, and a whole lot of different points there. Also, slightly cheekily, a redeveloped tennis precinct, which we stopped showing shortly after this image was shown. But I think, again, this idea of really preserving this parklands feel, the individual pavilions in a garden setting was the really key aspect. and probably getting a sense of what the ultimate feeling would be like with a redeveloped ground on the internal side as well. So anyway, then jumping forward to 2010, we then were actually successful in working on the full redevelopment of the Oval. Again, this is one of our very first sketches, so this idea of the 3 pavilions in a parkland setting, the beautiful riverbank, bridge connection through to the city. Very simple diagram at the time, but it really laid the foundation for the project. By this stage, we started to look at the roof shells of the western stand really being a stronger influence on both the eastern and the southern stand. There was also a sense, as we started to develop, that this new urban connection and a public realm around the Oval would be really important. And so a connection from the city that connected a new concourse level and I guess continued this idea of the great promenade around the ground. We would then build up these new pavilions, and this is a little sketch study of the eastern stand, and traditional grounds always looking at the Oval. We also wanted to engage with the Parkland setting and create quite a dynamic internal environment, and then the roof forms that would drop on as well. So these are some of the very first sketches we did, and I think early investigations to demonstrate this idea of creating a contemporary venue, but doing it very much in a sense that honoured the heritage context of the ground. So jumping forward to some of our developed design renders, we're a very three-dimensional office. We work with sort of three-dimensional tools that go from yellow trace to the final outcome. These were the final renders, and they're pretty much what was built, and this model was used for the construction process. A huge amount of work by a lot of people on this idea of this sort of sculptural pavilion in a parkland setting, where the new southern stand with the plaza would really be a sort of a gateway to the city, and the eastern stand would really be something that would sit in the landscape and really honour that parkland setting as well. So a shot of the southern plaza, and I think one of the game day experiences for cricket and football that most people talk about now is this sense of arrival when you arrive on the southern plaza, and obviously the new Oval presents that identity back to the city. We did stop showing redevelopments of tennis stadiums by this stage, because obviously that was outside the scope of our project, but we did get a chance to do that a bit later, and we might get a chance to touch on that as well. So again, still sort of design sketches at this stage, but that sense of arrival, a seamless transition from the river across Memorial Drive to the plaza and to the Oval as well. Probably one of the most, I think, interesting aspects to us was this notion of it sitting in a parkland setting, and obviously the cathedral was a really big part of that. So this design study, I think, really captured the essence of what we wanted this new East Stand to be. And that also, the gaps between the different pavilions was quite important. There's a sense of openness when you come to the Oval, a connection from outside and inside that we wanted to retain. We felt that was very important as well. As a bit of a side note, there's a lot of technical work that goes into these projects, and there was a lot of work to demonstrate that this would be closer to the action than the MCG, would have better service for all the patrons in terms of food and beverage and toilets and the sort of amenity that the modern sports fan wants. Huge amount of attention on the drip line undercover, and a lot of technical attributes that I think everyone takes for granted, but there was a lot of benchmarking and research we did for venues, not just around Australia, but also around the world, to really make the Adelaide Oval experience something that was absolutely the best it could be. And it has actually set the standard for all the other venues that we've been involved with since, and a lot of other venues as well. And I think that patron experience is something that everyone talks about when they come here. Always with a sense of, those connections to Cathedral and the Northern Mound. Some of the internal spaces are really important. So this, of course, is the William McGarry room. It was called then City View Dining Room with a view to the city. I know this room, which is the Cathedral Dining Room, has been an important part for this club, and probably just a personal apology for a hotel project that might have intervened in the use of that room, but there may be a chance to look at that view, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But again, these are very different spaces that not just was about the experience of the game, but actually creating unique spaces that actually projected out and showed views of some incredible landmarks. And the Stadium Club, which, if anyone's been in there at the time, hadn't been done in Australia before. These were happening in the UK and happening in the States, but sort of private clubs where you could have a reserved seat out the front and have a great food and beverage and networking experience inside. So at the end of the design phase, Balderstone at the time, now Lend Lease, were awarded the contract to build the Oval. There was an incredibly aggressive program, and they did a lot of work to demonstrate that they could finish the ground on time. And this is one of the snapshots from their model simulation of the construction sequence. It's got to be said that Lend-Lease did a remarkable job, and without their efforts and energies and expertise, we wouldn't have got the outcome that we wanted. I must admit, at the start, it was interesting when the old stands came down, and some of the shots and some of the demolition phases were those sort of, moments you kind of go, oh my God, what have we done? But we did have faith that it was all going to be okay. Interestingly, once they sort of cleared everything out, the Western Stand still stood there and did give a sense of the future. And we had a team on site for over 2 years, or just under 2 years, just behind the Northern Mound, living and breathing this every day. And it was, again, something very special to be part of. And the amount of people and trades and different sequences that we, worked through the construction phase was something quite remarkable. And there's actually a lot of sort of handcraft. This is one of the Boilermakers making one of the steel raker beams that ended up supporting the bowl structure of some of the seating plats. And as the construction progressed, the ground started to take shape. They actually did some pretty significant oval works as well, completely relaid all the turf. They took all the original soil off the original Wicket block and took it out and protected it and stored it and kept it so they could come back and keep that original pitch arrangement. And Damien Hoff, who's obviously the curator here now, after many years of Les Burdett, did a remarkable job in that regard. It was a pretty fascinating construction process to be involved in, and to see something that had gone from that very first sketch and some of the 3D models to suddenly developing into what we thought was going to be a really iconic piece of public architecture for Adelaide was, obviously a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and the satisfaction that we all felt and that everyone felt from the client through ourselves to the builder when this started taking shape was something that was quite remarkable. I think the connection to Riverbank and that sort of city experience, and again, this is a shot with the bridge under construction and the southern roof coming in, gave a sense of what was about to complete. So in 2014, in May, when the ground was completed, of course, it was a very big celebration, and I think those original characteristics of the Western Stand setting the scene, a new Southern Stand, Riverbank Stand, and the Eastern Stands, creating that theatre of sport, but not in any way that detracted from the spatial qualities and the sense of context of the ground. This was, I think, a Adelaide versus Sydney game where we got this panorama shot. Southern Stand, which is perhaps more of the heroic stand in that connection back to the city. We used a lot of bronze, a lot of materials that wouldn't normally be used on stadiums, and we felt that was important for the stadium to really age gracefully in the Parkland setting. So we're effectively building this project to be a 100-year plus arrangement. Of course, the match day experience is also something that's pretty special, and that has something to do with the architecture, but a lot to do with the people that come and make the event possible. I think the first showdown, I can't say I was overly impressed being a Crows fan because Port dominated the day, but having worked with both clubs and seeing how well Port did to transition from their venue to the Oval was actually, I think, something quite incredible, and I think both clubs have really embraced the ground. The AFL actually started sending people over to go to Port games in particular, and they were doing audio checking of the ground. They just didn't understand, what have you done to the roof shells to make the atmosphere so incredible. I think Port started actually playing crowd noise down at Alberton at training sessions at really high volume, so the players could get used to communicating when they couldn't actually hear what they were saying. Such was the atmosphere that the crowd was creating, and that's it's a pretty remarkable thing. There have been a lot of other pretty amazing events. This was the World Cup India Pakistan game. I think it's the highest watched game of all time, over 1.5 billion spectators. Rolling Stones concert in October 2014, and I think again everyone probably underestimated the power of this venue to deliver so many incredible events. And some of those internal spaces, they finished the McGarry room and of course the cathedral room as well. So look, it was a remarkable project to be involved in. I couldn't list all the incredible people that really made it happen. We did have a client that made a huge difference, and some of the people on the SMA and from both SACA and SANFL in particular, as well as members of government, were incredibly influential in allowing us to get such a high quality outcome, which hopefully will continue to stand the test of time. Okay, I did want to move on and show, sometimes for some people controversially, the hotel. It's interesting to note that in the existing east stand there's actually some quite deep recesses, and what we've been able to do is to insert some rooms into those recesses. The other interesting fact is that approximately 60% of the hotel already exists, in that the bars, the kitchens, the car parks, the security, the linen, everything else is already in operation and is often unutilised in the eastern stand. So all we've done is put in 138 rooms and a new entry pod. Sometimes, and hopefully this video will work for everyone. So this shows the existing eastern stand and then the hotel project. So it does actually fit into those recesses between the stair towers, and in our opinion does it in quite a delicate way. It sits above the existing concourse, and then a new entry pod which sits over the eastern entry will provide a pretty remarkable, I guess, guest experience when they're arriving from the hotel. So this sort of project has happened around the world, but it's the first time it's happened in Australia, and I get a lot of people outside of Adelaide saying to me, how is it that you South Australians always come up with these great ideas? I can't say that everyone in South Australia has said that to me. But look, I am pretty confident it's going to be something pretty remarkable, and hopefully it will have a very positive impact. So just some shots, the entry pod, shots out of the entry pod, and then some of the rooms. So I guess, yeah, the view of the cathedral isn't lost, but you probably have to look at it a different way. I am conscious of time. I'll go through quickly. Just a couple of quick projects. So Her Majesty's Theatre is under construction, is due to be open in June this year. It's a lot more than a refurbishment project. We're rebuilding the auditoria inside, which was sadly lost back in the 60s, and I guess trying to recreate some of those original Edwardian qualities to the theatre, but also then a new contemporary structure next door. It's a very significant project in that it's rebuilding front of house, rebuilding auditoria, but also all the back of house to completely reinvent the venue and get all the commercial shows back to Adelaide that have been bypassing our city for a long time, and a huge amount of work with the Trust, Adelaide Festival Trust, on really creating something we think will be a remarkable performance venue for Adelaide. So a front of house experience for all the patrons, but also new auditoria that will be something quite special, and an opportunity to see some really fantastic shows, some construction photos as well. And look, just lastly, a couple of other quick projects. So we did eventually get the chance to work on the tennis project next door, which we just completed a roof that the Adelaide International utilised, and of course Ash Barty won her first tournament on home soil, which was fantastic, and we've tried to do that in a way that very much complemented the architecture of the Oval, and hopefully shows that getting an international tennis event back to Adelaide will have some major positive impacts for tennis for the future. Karen Rolton is something we also just completed with SACA out at Park 25, which is a community and women's sporting facility, which again has been used for a lot of events and has probably exceeded the expectation of the kind of events that would have there, but also, you know, again, in an Adelaide context, sometimes building in the parklands can be a bit controversial. We've tried to do that in a very sensitive way that really celebrated the landscape. And lastly, the Adelaide Botanic High School, another project in the parklands. I think we're getting a bit of a reputation for projects in our beautiful parklands. A vertical high school that refurbished the existing Reed building, if anyone knows that building, and converted it to a new school. The Reed building is on the left-hand side, a new building to the right, and then a central atrium. It's a very, I guess, ambitious project for a new vertical high school for Adelaide, where everything is, I guess, considered in a little bit more of a university-type model with a central atrium and a lot of activated learning spaces. But it has been an incredibly successful outcome, and has actually kind of redefined public education in many ways, not just for South Australia, but also nationally as well. And if we've got time, I'd just like to finish with a very quick video, about a minute and a half. When we finish this project, obviously architects have views and designers have views about what we think the project outcome was, but we decided to go and ask the staff and students at the school one very simple question, which was, what does Adelaide Botanic High School mean to you?
when I think about Adelaide Botanic High School, it means a real game changer in the education world for us.
We're yet to discover what its sort of full potential is, but it's done a great job in bringing everyone together.
The vibe of the place is more so like a university than a high school.
I'm so lucky to be here and have the opportunity to work here because this is such an incredible school.
When you actually come here and see the kids' faces and the joy of their learning and opportunity, it is just something to see.
Adelaide Botanic High School to me is the most amazing school. The connectivity between our location, our school and our spaces is just something that you just wouldn't get at any other school.
I like how it's quite open and from any floor you can see across the entire school.
Acoustic treatment throughout the building means that we're not interrupted by groups next door or down the hall.
It feels quite futuristic, almost like it shouldn't be here, like it's something that should not be here for like another 10, 20 years in the future, but at the same time it feels like it should be.
The zoos, the city, you can see the botanic gardens.
A lot of trees and green.
Lots of timber, I think, gives that a nice sort of calm atmosphere.
One of my favourite things about the school is the Atrium Space.
Whether we have guests and see them look up and it's just like, whoa.
We've not really understood how powerful the space is until we've moved into this building.
I think the attention to detail here is what makes Adelaide Botanic High School so special. Every finish is just amazing and certainly helps us to feel at home here at school.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Much appreciated.
I was just wondering if anybody has got any questions for Adam.
I'm a soccer fan, so I'm going to ask you.
Get the microphone.
Yeah. I'm a soccer fan, so I'm asking about the soccer stadium that's being talked about, and have you got designs for that, or are you involved in that?
I'm a soccer fan as well, so I can sympathise with the question as well as a football and cricket fan. Oh, look, we can't help ourselves as designers. We've had a look at a few sites for soccer venues, and my personal view is I do think long term a dedicated rectangular pitch stadium that sits somewhere within the proximity of this ground is the right long-term option for Adelaide. And I do think whilst the Adelaide Oval does host rectangular pitch format and does it very well, I do think a purpose design one would be a fantastic outcome. I may not share exactly my view about where that goes, but somewhere close to here, sort of over in that direction a little bit. Look, and I hope that eventually it does happen because I think it's really required for the city.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I used to be a tour guide here, and one of our members, Craig Hammond, over there is a tour guide at the Adelaide Oval. One of the things that I remember, the amount of time that people would go and see, overseas visitors, go and see the MCG, then they'd come here and they'd say they enjoy this so much more because of all the way that the nature and the parks and the city and everything's been integrated, the history and all the rest of it. So congratulations, you really achieved that well. I often wonder, though, and you would probably be aware that the Don was a 50-year member of the Rotary Club of Adelaide, and we know why football left, because people didn't want things to change. And I'm just wondering, in that design process, did you have much opposition to the fact, or people desiring to put something up the other end where those trees that were planted in 1880 are? Can you tell us anything about what happened in that regard?
Yes, so we actually looked at a scheme very early on of a complete ground because we, as designers, you test every option. And what was very interesting, which everyone who looked at it, from the design team, from the client group, from football and cricket, everyone unanimously immediately said, it's just not right. The Adelaide Oval won't be the same without, retaining the North Mound. It ended up being written into the legislation of the Adelaide Oval Act that you actually cannot redevelop that part of the ground, and I think you wouldn't feel the same if this was a pure Coliseum, and I think everyone would be united. Very quick story: we did a number of years ago as a bit of an April Fool's gag on behalf of Andrew Daniels, the SMA. We did a render where we mirrored this stand and put it at the other end, and it was actually released to the papers, and the amount of people that phoned in and just went absolutely nuts over this was incredible. Graham Corns, I think, got on the phone and was demanding for action, and how could anyway it was. And I think the SMA came out and sort of politely reminded everyone the date was the 1st of April and so forth. But yeah, look, I think you've hit on a really important part of it, and it does need to be stated that the client group was always a very strong part of that base of why the design ended up being the way that it is.
Just got room for perhaps another question or two.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for the magnificent stadium. I have the privilege to use it for sports at least 30 times a year, but I do sit in the Western stand, and I often hear ladies complaining about the adequacy of toilets. It seems to be a stand that's bereft of toilets, littered with portaloos outside. Has anything ever been given consideration to bolting toilets on each level near the lift wells? It'd be something that I would think architecturally, it'd be very simple and might provide a better facility than we currently enjoy in the Western stand.
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and it has been discussed a lot, not just in just toilets, but also food and beverage. Both of these two stands and the redevelopment was designed under something called the Green Guide, which is an international design guidelines for modern stadia. Unfortunately, the Western stand was not. There has been food and beverage put at the upper levels as part of this redevelopment, but the comment about toilets is something that could be looked at. I mean, there are some limitations with the cricket pavilion. It was never designed for football, and that's another thing we hear, that it's fine when you've got a test match and you've got hours during the day to wander around, but when there's a football game going on, you've got quarter time, there's not enough time to get access. So, yeah, comment well taken.
Well, I think that concludes our fantastic talk today by Adam. I should also say that well, Adam and I are kind of related by marriage, so we have part of the extended family. There have been many long, shall we say, discussions over lunch while all of this was happening, and so it's to Adam's great credit, both as a diplomat and as an architect, that we're all not only speaking to him, but we're really, really, really pleased with the final result. So, well, thank you very much, Adam. And here we used to give a little pen to as a token appreciation, but we've really upped the game now, and so as a certificate of appreciation, this is a donation has been made in your name to help in the eradication of polio in the world. So we'd like to thank Adam in a huge way.